Welcome back to Week in One. I am Avi Wemtila. eNCA's JJ Tabane spoke to Tata Celo Morero, the newly elected chairperson of the Johannesburg ANC region, after a heated race with former acting chair Eunice Sibongile Mgcina. JJ touched on all matters ANC, which of course include the proverbial elephant in the room.
If you look at the national scenario now, today, let's talk practical things. You know, your president is being accused of selling game and keeping $4 million on their farm. And is this something that worries you? Because remember, people may vote for you locally, but they also look at the national politics that are influential.
Yeah, that's what affects us in the main in Johannesburg. But I think I'm encouraged by the decision of the president to immediately present himself to the Integrity Committee so that he can be questioned properly by the party, and the party can get true answers as to what has happened and transpired, and not necessarily rely on the reports by Fraser, but to allow him to go there, present himself. They'll ask him relevant questions and convince themselves whether his conduct has a negative effect on the party, and whether his integrity is at question. So there are competent comrades
you agree with me that there isn't a habit of people really being held accountable to the T, isn't it? They're always trying to find another reason why they should just be left alone.
No, accountability is a problem at all levels of the party.
All levels.
Even in the state. Also including the fact that we have not really ensured consequence management as the party. And part of what we're trying to do in the renewal program is to try and deal with those things. So you need decisive leadership at all levels. And we have to start somewhere.
The National Assembly and National Council of Provinces have presented budget allocations for both houses this week. eNCA anchor Mfundo Mabalane spoke to the Deputy Chairperson, Sylvia Lucas, and followed up on the issue with some hard-hitting questions regarding the allegations that the president concealed a crime on his farm.
Then to the current matter that's gripped society, the allegations that the president concealed a crime at his farm. One, he's not a member of parliament, but politicians and South Africans alike want a bit more clarity around what exactly happened. Is the closest to having him share or give that clarity only when the chief whip calls him and then he addresses his political party? Is that the closest to accountability now that you know of?
Let me start by saying, firstly, it is true what you are saying. There's allegations. President have in a public platform said, yes, there is indeed something that is existing. But we must also know someone went to a police station to register a case, which means some of the issues is what we call sub judice, and that is unfortunately like that in law. But in order for Parliament to ask the president to come in account, there is an existing committee that Parliament and the presidency specifically report to. And that is, if we come to that point, that is the committee that will now request the president to brief them on the issues or on the areas. But you must remember, we can't have a dual process that is unfolding. There is someone that laid a complaint at the police, and now I think the police must, or the NPA must process that complaint. But if at all the speaker or the political, or let me say the speaker or the executive authority decide that we want the president to take us into confidence, there is a mechanism that can be put in place to make sure that the president come and report to, not necessarily to the chief whip. That is the party's issues. But as for Parliament, there is an oversight committee that can specifically deal with a specific issue. But I think first things first, is the process must unfold as it should unfold, and it will eventually come to Parliament for the president to come to respond to the issues.
The arrest of the Gupta brothers was and still is a hot talking point in many of our shows this week. And our morning show anchor, Tumelo Mthotwana, interviewed Nicole Fritz from the Defend Our Democracy campaign.
What was your initial reaction upon hearing of the arrest of the Gupta brothers?
It's obviously, I think, an enormously positive development that there is now a real prospect that those who, as you say, have been the masterminds of the state capture process in South Africa and have siphoned off billions from South African state-owned enterprises, from the coffers for their own personal enrichment, should now stand a real prospect of having to answer for their crimes in a South African court. And that certainly is for the good.
Now, and what does this mean then for South Africa? Because in as much as we're hearing that they've been arrested, South Africans understandably are keen to see what developments will transpire, but we saw government very cautiously warning that this is quite a lengthy process. So what happens? What are the next steps then for the South African government?
Sure. I mean, understandably, I think the authorities here are going to want to manage expectations. And the fact is that the Gupta brothers are enormously wealthy, primarily as a consequence of their ill deeds here in South Africa. And they can be expected to lawyer up and have the very best legal teams available to them. And extradition is not necessarily a simple process. So I anticipate that they will take every opportunity to challenge a proposed extradition process. And it is very difficult at this point in time to say how long and how contested that extradition process might be and when exactly we're likely to see the Gupta brothers here before a South African court.
Yeah. And Nicole, you did mention that obviously, because they are indeed a wealthy family, they will explore all legal, advice or routes available to them. Can you just share with us some of them with which, just to take note of, that they could explore? What could they do on their side legally to avoid coming to South Africa, avoiding facing, the justice here in South Africa, or perhaps while they're even in Dubai? What legal routes are available for them right now?
Right. Well, I mean, one concern obviously is that if they are granted bail, that they might look to skip the jurisdiction of the United Arab Emirates, and then we would be back to square one. The second, I mean, there are within the extradition process, right? A court will be looking in terms of specific legal requirements as to whether an extradition can be effected. A court will assess whether the crimes for which they are wanted in South Africa correspond to crimes that are in effect in the United Arab Emirates. Again, I do not think that would necessarily be a difficult hurdle. It may be that the Gupta brothers would suggest and seek to argue that the South African judicial process would not afford them a fair trial, that they, in fact, are being persecuted. Again, my sense is that any reasonable and realistic overview of the South African justice system would not bear that out. But you can certainly anticipate that these types of arguments will be made in an attempt to avoid having to return to South Africa and stand before a court.
Yeah.
Stay tuned to Week in One, keeping you abreast of all the top stories that have been making headlines over the past 7 days.